Do natural history museums present the truth about origins? Watch our Genesis Impact movie to see a young Christian successfully challenge a museum docent on the leading evidences for evolution.
Until the deed is done. Until the quest is won. The battle's in our minds. Until the end of time.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Fantasy Fiction!
Covering this kind of subject matter, this Genesis Apologetics or Genesis Impact by Genesis Apologetics, it's like they tailor-made this for me. It's like this is explicitly my other piece. This is a perfect opportunity for me to kind of bust out my my chops with regard to my education, because this is right up my alley. This is all of the stuff that I spend all day doing nothing but learning about or teaching, right? Because I teach a lab as well. So, you know, I'm constantly up to date on the literature with this stuff because I have to be. I'm a PhD student. And then I get to disseminate that to my evolutionist information from the ivory towers to the masses, which I'm sure Genesis Apologetics hates that. But it's one of those things where it's like, you know, they can get away with it because they know that no one is capable of fact checking them on this stuff. When they say something along the lines of like, oh, you know, the condition for Ardipithecus ramidus, which we spoke about last week, you know, they didn't even find the base of the skull. If you're a creationist and you hear that, you're like, wow, I can't believe the evolutionists would lie like that. And no one takes the time to, or even knows really what to Google, right? I mean, you can sit down and go inferior view of Ardipithecus ramidus basicranium. And you're going to get the foramen magnum right there, the full base of the skull that they found. But people don't know what to look up. So I think this kind of stuff is really important, especially for people who, you know, might have like a toe in creationism and they're curious as to kind of fact checking what they're hearing. And I'm more than happy to provide that wherever and whenever possible. Dan Biddle he's on my list. He's on my nemesis list. He's not number one, but he's up there.
I mean, it looks like there's a lot of speculation going on here. In some cases, even exaggeration. It doesn't look like she would be a good walker to me. But I bet she'd get around in trees like other apes. You had a slide showing Artie next to a bonobo, correct? When you put her next to a bonobo, it sure looks like she fits into the ape family just fine.
You know, we have several fossils that show evolutionary steps between ape-like creatures and humans. Take Lucy, for example. She's probably the best evidence of human evolution.
What kills me about this is that, as we spoke about last time briefly, I believe this was last time when we talked about this, but they only know about Lucy. That's it. Like these guys who get up here and run the apologetics for you know, against science, effectively, that's what it is, pro-young earth creationism. They don't know about any of the other fossil specimens. They know Lucy, and that's it. I guarantee you I would put dollars to donuts that they couldn't say Lucy's species, which is Australopithecus afarensis, but they definitely don't know that there are indeed numerous other species within that genus, right? You've got Australopithecus garhi, Australopithecus africanus, Australopithecus sediba, Australopithecus barrel-ghazali, and diarmida, if you accept those, which I don't. I think they're probably afarensis. But you know, at the very least, 3 to 4, give or take, other species within the genus.
And you didn't even mention like Kenyanthropus platyops, which is for the layman viewer, is somewhere betwixt Australopithecus and Homo, so more basal even than Homo habilis or Rhodophensis. And so there's a whole lot of them out there, and there's not just one for almost any. I mean, there's a rare occasion where we have just one individual for a given thing, but most of the time there's more than one known for it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's, you know, you've got your holotype, right, which is the first specimen found that's associated and complete enough to be associated with a new name, with a new species name. But the thing about Australopithecus is, as you said, we've got lots of them, not just within Australopithecus afarensis, where we've got the remains of like 300, 400 odd individuals, not full skeletons as Genesis Apologetics likes to cry about, but indeed numerous partial skeletons. And what these guys seem to forget is like, we are humans, we are apes were hominins, were mammals, and most mammals are bilaterally symmetric, all mammals to my understanding, which means if you have one half, you have the other half, right? So you don't even need the full skeleton to get a really good idea as to what this thing probably looked like. Not to mention the fact that things like limb ratios, the way certain bones fit together in the carpals or in the tarsals, the certain angles of things like the zygomatics or the orientation position of the foramen magnum are going to tell you a whole lot about the pieces you might have missing. For example, if you have like a really forward foramen magnum, that's the hole at the base of the skull that's also angled forward, you can bet with a pretty decent certainty that that thing's going to be bipedal. And if it's bipedal, it probably has the other characteristics associated with bipedality, even if you don't have those bits. And the reason is because biomechanically, if it's a biped, you can't have a lot of these quadrupedal adaptations. So like you're not going to get a chimpanzee pelvis with a foramen magnum that's anterior and angled forward because the thing couldn't move, right? The chimpanzee pelvis is designed, as it were, it's adapted for quadrupedal locomotion on the ground and in the trees, and occasionally being orthograde or upright. But what that means is that it's not conducive at all for consistent bipedality. So you're not going to be able to find that biomechanically in association with what we see for Australopiths, which have that forward foramen magnum, so the skull can sit directly on top of the vertebral column and survey the landscape. So all of these different aspects of paleontology and taphonomy, which is the study of how things die and preserve, can inform us more about the animal that left the bones behind than just the bones themselves. And these guys never appreciate that, ever. They don't care.
Well, more than that, when he says that she's the best evidence we have for evolution, she was a predicted transitional species. She's the one that Darwin specifically described for in the human evolutionary line. And so when they say that they've never found the missing link, well, in fact, they have. It was way back in 1974. It was a half a century ago. Where you been, guys?
Well, not only that, Aaron, but she's the one that they asked for, the creationists, before they ever got it. They asked for an ape man. They've been asking for their ape man all this time. They didn't expect an ape woman, I guess. That's really what bothers them, is that Lucy is a girl boss. That's what pisses them off about her. But in reality, it's like you have all of these different specimens. And like, I'll just tell you my favorite one. And do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to edit and put a picture in here? Because I think this is really important to see.
I'll edit.
Okay. STW 573, it's the Littlefoot Australopithecus africanus specimen. This thing's almost 100% complete. It's an Australopith. It is almost 100% complete as a skeleton. You've never seen anything like it. It has every bit of preserved anatomy that we need to know how this thing, for instance, moved around, and it's a biped, shocker. And what I love to point out about things like Australopithecus africanus is that, and specifically that specimen, the Littlefoot specimen, is that when you have a nice find like that, you can use that to corroborate every previous reconstruction that creationists have been casting doubt on. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, because I know what they're going to bring up with the pelvis, because they always bring up the buzzsaw, Aaron. You know they do.
Well, the other thing, as far as what is the best evidence, I would say that the best evidence is taxonomy. As you said, we are apes, and we know that through embryology, through fossils, through genetics, through just the accumulation of characters in what is an ape, what is a primate, what is a monkey, in any of these categories. If you describe what the characteristics are that identify anybody as a member of that group, if you have the characteristics that are inclusive of everyone that is in that group without making special exceptions for certain ones, then when you describe monkeys, you describe people. If you describe old world versus new world, you describe people, and so on. And so that taxonomy was the first evidence of evolution. Before there was an evolution there, that's when Carolus Linnaeus was saying, there's a thing here. I don't understand this. Why is it? Carolus Linnaeus said, 1735, how is it that people are apes, or that apes are people? Because he said both. He said he couldn't tell the difference between them. If you want the best evidence, that's it. Still undisputed, constantly confirmed. And then there's the fact that evolution happens. Oh, well, that's just microevolution. Well, yeah, well, show me micro creation then. Show me fuck all supernatural. Supernatural anything.
Not even that,
If
but
there
it's
was
like,
a supernatural, people want to say, well, if the supernatural is real, you wouldn't be able to test it. Really? The supernatural is real in Star Wars and in Star Trek and in Lord of the Rings and in a bunch of other movies. And in every one of those cases, Hermione or Gandalf or Spock or Obi-Wan are always able to demonstrate those powers under controlled conditions where we can see that really works. So if magic was real, Gandalf would be demonstrating how to do it.
I mean, for me too, right? It's the fact that like they don't have a counter model for this, right? Like you can say, okay, we see evolution, and as you said, they'll say, well, that's just microevolution. Forget the fact that we do have ring species, that we've seen speciation occur in the wild and in the lab in real time today. They get, oh, it's still a fruit fly, it's still a salamander, it's still a finch. Okay, well, like my counter question to that is the same exact mechanisms that are at play to cause that speciation extend far back in time. What do you have to suggest that rule even can be violated? That you can have a situation where you don't have inheritance, selection, and mutation that are going to act on these populations of organisms. And I love to say it this way, right? Effectively, nature is fine-tuning them for their environment. That's what's happening, because the ones that aren't die and don't leave their genes to pass on. So, my question is always like, where does it stop? Because they'll accept microevolution. Of course they will. No one can deny that. So where does it stop, and why does it stop there? And this gets even more fun when you talk to the folks at like AIG who like to do their kinds, right? Horses and donkeys are the same kind. Dogs and wolves are the same kind. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, that's a lot of evolution for 4,400 years since the flood, which is, of course, what they propose. Why does it stop where it stops? They don't have anything for that. Of course, you propose this, and then they'll go, but what about abiogenesis? And you're like, oh my God, like
Okay, so they're redefining what macroevolution is, which is speciation. That was the big thing that Carolus Linnaeus understood, as everybody did, long before Darwin, that you can derive different breeds of pigeons or dogs or corn or whatever. Agriculture was well on the way. Animal husbandry was well on the way. They knew that this could happen. They just didn't know how it could happen in nature. And the argument was that they didn't use kinds. They said within a species. And so you can get different breeds within a species, but what about different species where all you can get is infertile hybrids? What creates different species that are can no longer produce viable offspring at all? And so Darwin answered Carolus Linnaeus' problem when he wrote the book On the Origin of Species, showing that new species can evolve. That's no longer microevolution, that's macro. And that is according to every academic source that just gives a definition for this word. And the creationists will say, no, that's not what it means. It's what some convicted fraud with a phony degree told me it means. That's where they're coming from. They want to redefine all the terms. And so when they say that it's still a fruit fly or it's still a finch, they're completely ignoring taxonomy. They're ignoring the strongest evidence there is for evolution. And they're wanting to say that something gives birth to something else or changes into something else that is so different from its parents that it's not related to its parents. Like pine trees giving birth to elephants or something insanely stupid like that.
You want to know the irony of that, Aaron, is that one time me and a friend of mine, friend of the channel, Just a Walking Fish, he's got a lovely channel, but he doesn't really upload that much. Sorry, Walker, but you don't. And he and I did a collaboration on proboscideans. So for those of you who might not know, proboscideans are elephants, right? They're elephants and their kin. So Erytherium, Barytherium, all the Gomphotheres, all that kind of stuff, going back to the early portions of the Cenozoic. And proboscideans are really tough for creationists. And the reason that they're tough is because there are so many of them in the Cenozoic. And most creationists think that the flood layer stops at the extinction of the dinosaurs, the end Cretaceous. So they've got all of proboscidean diversity that they have to explain after the flood. So that's 4,400 years for all of the proboscideans. Proboscideans take forever to give birth. They grow up extremely slowly. And so what Walker and I did is we decided to drum up a list of, okay, how many proboscidean species do we know of? And how many does AIG accept? And we came up with with a calculation to try to figure out how fast would speciation need to happen after those two elephants get off the ark in order to explain all of the diversity that we have today. And the answer is every single offspring would have to be a different species, recognizable in the fossil record, than its parent. Every single one. And you still don't get enough. You still don't get enough proboscideans. So the hilarious part about that is that's what they're proposing. And that's what they say evolution can't do, which they're right, because it doesn't do that. But that's what they're proposing for their own model. It's the most absurd thing you've ever heard in your life. And you know, you can, again, you ask, like, well, if all of this diversity can happen in 4,400 years, why stop there? Why does it stop at 4,400 years ago? That's the maximum that these guys can diversify. Why don't you just take it all the way back to a common ancestor of all organisms? And that's when they say, well, there's not enough time. Plus the Bible said no. Their myopic interpretation of it says no. And then it becomes a different conversation. And it always comes back to the age of the earth, I found at least.
So what I found with creationists, especially young earth creationists, is that they say that they accept microevolution, but they reject macro. In fact, they've got it backwards. They reject micro because they refuse to accept that mutations provide new information in the genome. And they fully accept macro, the evolution of new species. They admit, oh yeah, new species come along all the time. But that's that's change at or above the species level, which of course includes the emergence of new species. But no, they say that's not macroevolution. But what they really believe in is something that's beyond macro, because they believe in the emergence of new genus or even family levels, right? It just depends on which creationist you're talking to or about which one. You mentioned proboscidean. So Ken Ham said, the proboscidean was its own kind. And so that everything, all of those species all come from the same thing, that they're all basically like subspecies of the same thing. And that so what they actually believe in is not just macroevolution, but a super accelerated, hyper caffeinated electro mega evolution.
Yeah, it's like hyper, mega, uber, however many, amplifiers you can put in front of it. It's like nothing you've ever seen. And you're right. They need that to happen without new information. And like something that I thought was really interesting, and like I've talked to other folks who are, hip with the creationist jive, liking to talk about this stuff and investigate their literature, because I think it's fun. I like to know what they are saying and what they're trying to work out. And, they've got this concept, because if all of their created groups, right, have the genetic diversity to create all of the modern analogs, and indeed all of the species throughout the Cenozoic, and they have to, because like you said, they don't believe in microevolution, they don't accept it, so you can't make new information. So God had to have created these original organisms with the diversity already in place, just not like active or something like that. And what do you do with that when you've got like one bat kind and like thousands of bat species to explain today? And the answer is their genome is physically too large to exist. So like, I mean, you can debunk young earth creationism 6 weeks to Tuesday. I mean, every single field is problematic. All of them, except maybe optics. Like, I don't know how they do it. And, I my advisor in my PhD program, it's kind of funny because he used to dunk on creationists as well. He's actually in a couple of books that are like, he's a guest writer for some of those. And, I was talking he's got a chapter in, what's it called? I think it's called, let's see, Scientists Confront Creationism. I have it over there on my shelf. Scientists Confront Creationism. He's got a chapter in there where he talks about like, how do you make sense of it, right? Like creationists and educated creationists, right? His answer is cognitive dissonance. That's it's cognitive dissonance, or it's dishonesty, or it's both. Like, it's got to be one of those, because and I think it's also, they have to stay in their own lane, right? Like you get these creationists and they're like, all I study is like magnetism in the fossil record and nothing else, because then they can focus on trying to make their one little piece of the puzzle work, and they can ignore the preponderance of other things that make their whole ideology impossible. It bums me out actually for them. Something just fell. It bums me out for them.
We could go on this topic for quite a while. As you know, I wrote rather a large book on the dishonesty of creationism.
Oh, yeah.
I see it demonstrated again every time I interact with these people, when they know what the data is that they cannot admit, that they must reject, even when they know that it's true, they have to find some excuse, some minutia to mean that it's not really 100% what it says, like, or that maybe it's not always what it's, any excuse, because they can't admit the truth. When you know that, like the debate between Dave Farina and James Tour that just happened, I asked James Tour how he, you have all this evidence that, we didn't have terrestrial vertebrates before 300 million years ago. We didn't have vertebrates at all before 500 million years ago. 80% of the history of life on this planet is microscopic and microbial, with the earliest microfossils dating up to 3.8 billion years. And then there's nothing. There's no microfossils at all. So microbes for 80%, and then we start getting developments and advanced things for only very recent. Doesn't that not imply to you that there was this, all the rest of this is natural, this natural abiogenesis event must have happened here? And all he would say is, hey, we got here somehow. He wasn't going to answer the question. He wasn't going to say that he accepts any of that evidence. Not the geologic history, not the taxonomy, not the genetic the molecular clock, none of it. He throws it all out in favor of a fairy tale. But we can't go on about that because we're supposed to be talking about this group. We spent 30 minutes railing over him saying that Australopithecus was the best evidence for evolution.
I know. We got to use some. We're gonna have to use some discretion here.
She's displayed in museums and school textbooks around the world as the leading ape-to-human icon.
Why does he say icons? Jonathan Wells' Icons of Evolution. There's a guy who got a PhD specifically for the purpose of undermining Darwinism from within. Exactly.
I actually just happened to have this sitting right in front of me because I've been annotating it because I'd love to cover it eventually. And you're right. Like he did. You'll be tickled by this as well. I've been working on Jeffrey Tompkins' stuff, and Tompkins cites Wells. He cites Wells as one of his like professional experts, and you're like, you can't. You're just citing another creationist who doesn't have the background necessary to be saying what he's saying, which he was talking about how the human genome is 100% functional. It's like a whole thing.
So to give gravitas to this, the Reverend Sung Myung Moon came to Jonathan Wells and was willing to finance his entire education so that Wells could get this degree and thus appear to have the accolades so that he could, and the term used was, undermine Darwinism from within. Which is the same reason that James Tour has value in the creationist movement. He has he has a respected degree in a field kind of close to, but certainly not within the topic he's discussing. And so people will say, well, look at his credentials, as if that means something. Well, you're throwing out the entire scientific community, the consensus of all the best educated expert specialists anywhere ever, and you're siding with who? Oh, yes, the convicted fraud with the phony degree.
Well, I mean, don't forget as well, the Answers in Genesis currently has Nathaniel Jeanson on the pay doc, and he Nathaniel Jeanson has a quote it's like in his bio at Answers in Genesis, so it's not like it's hidden, where he's like, he uses the phrase use and abuse his degree for like, and now I'm paraphrasing, but for like evangelism, right? And it's like, that's just not how science operates, obviously, right? But like, you're supposed to try to kill your hypothesis, not prove it. That's like the whole point of it is you're trying to show how robust it is by trying to gut it. That's how science moves forward, is that you throw everything at the wall or you throw everything at your hypothesis, and if it's still standing, then you've got a cool idea on your hands. But that's never what it is for these guys. It's all about proving, which you also don't do in science, but providing support for their idea within their super mega myopic area that they have chosen to specialize in. And like the weird thing about it is like Jeanson did the same thing, to my understanding, that James Tour has done, which is his expertise is not in genetics. He does like developmental cell stuff, but all he talks about is genetics. That's it. And then when you're like, hey, like, you get Georgia Purdom on AIG where she goes on and she'll talk about like geology, and you're like, hey, Georgia, like, why are you talking about geology? And she's like, or you ask her a question about it, and she's like, well, I'm not a geologist. Then why are you talking about it? Like,
So they do have occasionally some actual PhDs, people who really do have legitimate degrees,
oh yeah.
and are sometimes even in their own field. And when you get those, then and the way that they get on staff at AIG is somewhere some scientist decides that they don't like reality, I guess, anymore, and so they just want to become religious apologists and make believe, because that's what religion is. It's make believe. So they want to go make believe. And so what you end up with somebody like Andrew Snelling or Garner, and they both have degrees in the same field, they have the same background. And then when they both write about the same organism, they contradict each other as to what it is. It's 100% designed for walking. No, it's 100% designed for swimming. And both of them say that that's the reason why it can't be transitional.
Oh, you can have a field day with how they deal with hominins, right? What's an ape? What's a human? Nobody knows. It's.
Well, here, check out this short BBC video narrated by Dr. Donald Johansen, the person who found Lucy.
We now have 400 specimens of Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, named after the Afar region. And we know that there are very large individuals, which were males, and the smaller ones are certainly female.
Did they really find hundreds of complete skeletons like they show on the video?
No. Here's what they actually found. What they mean by 400 specimens is 400 bone pieces, and over 30% of those are teeth. So no, there's only enough to display on a picnic table.
You see this cleverly edited photo. Doesn't look like a cleverly edited photo, does it? Oh, but it is, when you zoom out and see the rest of the table, because they've cut this picture to omit all this other stuff so that you can't see it. And all of this is still part of the same collection, from the same area, from the same species. Why would somebody do something so apparently dishonest as that? Because they want you to think that Lucy was the only skeleton and the only skull, when, sure, lots of them are known only from fragments. But if you find some in the Hadar region, you might find something in one area, and then a few miles away, you'll find something else. Obviously, it's a different individual. If you find a jawbone, we are accused of guessing that there must have been a skull attached to the jawbone, or that there might have been a whole animal attached to the jawbone at some point. How is that speculation? If you have a jawbone, you have an individual. You found a jawbone someplace else, that's a different individual. You have two individuals.
Yeah, so the thing about that too is, like, like we said, there's a lot of Australopithecus afarensis remains out there from numerous different individuals. 300 to 400, again, is what I tend to hear, but I always try to play it safe and say that that's, at least that many for Australopithecus, the genus. But that being said, we have a lot. And like, I have, obviously my mom says this is a composite for Lucy. And when I show this, people are like, wow, they find that whole skull for Lucy. And it's like, no, this is a composite for her species. But this is a full skull of Australopithecus africanus. The whole thing was found. This is one chunk. This is a 3D print of the uploaded scan. So when you hold the two of them side by side, you can see pretty well that what they've done as far as the reconstructions for the missing pieces for even just Lucy, let alone the species, because as you said, you've got different pieces from different specimens. And indeed, we've got like archetypes for male skulls, for female skulls. I would hazard a guess to say we know what the entire skull looks like just from the pieces alone, let alone the partial actual like skulls that we have for them. But like, it's not hard to see why they can make a composite when you do in fact have full skulls of extremely closely related species and some nearly complete skulls of afarensis specifically. But you're right, they're not going to mention Mrs. Ples, they're not going to mention Littlefoot, they're not going to mention Big Man, they're not going to mention Dakika Child, they're not going to mention anything from Sediba, they never do. They're not going to talk about any of that. They're going to talk about Lucy and that one site. And that's it. And they're going to be like, see, it's so much more fragmentary than you think. And it's like, I like to point this out to my students when we teach it, right? Like when we show the Lucy material, like she's exceptional for postcrania, But as far as the skull itself goes, it's really not that complete, but it doesn't need to be because we have other Australopiths and indeed other members of Australopithecus afarensis. The important bit of Lucy was the fact that we have identifiable diagnostic parts of the cranium that clock the individual as clearly an Australopith, in addition to postcrania that is more similar to humans than it is to any Miocene ape, and yet clearly is distinct. It's clearly something else. It's an animal that moved a lot like us, but not exactly like us. It's an animal that probably behaved not dissimilarly from us, but wasn't us. It's transitional, right? And I mean, I don't even like the word transitional because all species are transitional. There's no goal for evolution. It's not evolving towards anything. But in retrospect, I do think that it's appropriate for trying to get the concept across, because these things, now looking back, some of the members of this lineage would go on to eventually yield Homo sapiens. So in that way, it is transitional, isn't it? It's a population of organisms responding to the environment that's changing around them, and that just so happened to make their locomotor style more conducive to bipedality. By Lucy, and I like to bring this up with my students as well. By Lucy, they're fully bipedal, right? Like when they're on the ground, they are fully bipedal by the time we were at Australopithecus, like full stop. That doesn't mean they didn't spend any time in the trees. That means that when they came to the ground, they couldn't walk quadrupedally. Full stop. Like anatomically, it's not going to work. And I'll show you here. Like there's the foramen magnum on this skull. If I put my two fingers there and make them perpendicular to it, when I roll my hand up, it's vertical. If this thing's going to try to walk quadrupedally, it's not really going to work, is it? We know they're bipeds, and that's what they're going to be raise hell about here. But that is what it is. So
we've got a lot of content to go over.
I know. I know. All right, I'm gonna get back. I'm gonna share it again.
So here's Lucy, and the rest of the fossils they believe are from her species. They're scattered on the table. I'm sure you can only fill a bucket or two with them.
That sure doesn't look like what they show on the video when they say they found 400 specimens. It looks like they're exaggerating quite deliberately.
Now she's ascribing malice. Considering everything we just said and what they're doing, she's going to, with their edited photograph, she's going to put malice on the evolutionists.
Yeah, quite deliberately, as if there's some cabal out there that's trying to convince the world, like the very important, very financially beneficial career of paleoanthropology. Of course, they're trying to dupe the world into believing that you've got this nice lineage of hominins and that you indeed have more specimens than really we know what to do with. I mean, I always think it's kind of funny because Darwin lamented, that we don't have these fossils yet. He was right there at the dawn of paleoanthropology. I mean, it was his work that spurred Dubois to go out there, and in part that spurred Dubois to get out there and find Homo erectus. But I mean, we don't know what to do with the fossils that we have. We have so many, especially because I study the Miocene, right? So I study the apes that immediately precede hominins. And it's like, we have so many Miocene apes, we don't know how to connect them to each other. Like there's just too many. And within hominins, right? I mean, more fossils is always better. But the more fossils we found, the more that we figured out that like you have a lot of hominins doing a lot of different things in a lot of different ways, that it's not as linear as we once expected it to be back in the 60s and the 70s. And that's why creationists like to complain that it's gone from being an anagenetic line to being a bush. It's like, yeah, it has. There's too many hominins, right? Like I said earlier, we're talking about Kenyanthropus platyops and Australopithecus barrel-ghazali and Australopithecus diarmida. We spoke about, or I didn't actually bring it up, but there's Australopithecus prometheus, which some people think is what STW 573 belongs to. How do you classify Homo erectus? Are all the Dmanisi specimens, are those Homo georgicus, or should they be lumped in with one super hypervariable Homo erectus? What about Ergaster? You get to the muddle in the middle Pleistocene, you got these hominins that are kind of spanning the difference between Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and Denisovans, and Homo erectus, like those that span the difference. We have no idea what to do with those guys because so many of them are such an interesting hodgepodge of basal and derived characteristics. The problem is that there's just a lot of material and there's a lot of people working on it, but the whole concept here that they're artificially inflating the number of fossils that we have is just, I mean, to kind of use my Uno reverse card, it feels malicious, right? Because she is ascribing malintent to the scientific community here. And like, it makes you kind of want to grab her by the shoulders and go, you know, where do you get off on this, right? Like, where do you get off ascribing malice to the scientific community when you've done nothing so far in this video but misrepresent? And I say that in the interest of being charitable.
Yeah, and it's as if they want to project onto us that we have a faith-based absolute truth story we're trying to defend, which is what they're doing. And science, as they complain, changes when we find other evidence, because the way I look at it is, you know, science is a self-correcting process, and we are zeroing in on the one and only reality. If you were to have every religion wiped out and from some cataclysm, even if you leave them alone, the evolutions or the religions will still evolve on their own, and they go further and further apart. Whereas if you walk away from faith altogether, well, now you're doing the opposite. Now we're zeroing in. So opposite perspectives.
Mistakes to me, I mean, they increase my confidence in science, right? Like, oh, and they're going to bring this up later, but they're going to talk about the thoracic vertebra that was assigned to Lucy that actually belonged to a member of Australopithecus, a baboon, as they like to say.
Let's wait till we get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. But like, yeah, okay. Let's wait. And here's the thing, Aaron. I want you to know, I didn't pre-watch this time. I don't know that they're going to do that, but I know that they're going to do that, right? Like, I didn't watch this, but I will not be surprised when that happens.
When it comes to Lucy's fossils specifically, did they find her bones at the same place, and were they all connected?
No. She was found in hundreds of pieces scattered across a 3-meter area on a hillside. They sifted a total of 20 tons of sediment, covering 50 square meters, to find what resulted in only about 20% of all of her bones. But they didn't find any hand or feet bones, except for one small finger bone.
Yet you showed us pictures of Lucy rendered by different artists with human-like hands, feet, and even eye whites. Could you pull that one up? Do apes even have eye whites, like the picture you showed?
No.
Yes.
Look.
I know you've seen this one many times. This one I'm so sick of hearing, right? Like, first of all, humans are apes, obviously. But yes, in the natural variation in populations of chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangs, you do find white sclera in all 4. I've done countless compilations of just sit down on Google, ape white sclera. You just put that and you will get plenty of opportunities to see it. And in fact, it seems as though the number of individuals who are showing up with this condition is actually increasing, because wouldn't you know it, being able to follow the gaze of your conspecifics when you live in the same group is actually pretty good when you're trying to communicate with one another. The reason it isn't, in my opinion, showing up faster is because the contrast between the color of chimpanzees' irises and their sclera, which tend to be darker, is actually more intense, or at least on par with what we see with humans with like hazel eyes and white sclera. So they can actually differentiate the contrast of their eyes without having the white sclera, but it does show up in their populations as well.
And again, it's not an. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's just such an easy thing to check, right? It's so this is clearly something, and I tracked it down at one point. I can't remember who said it, but like there was a creationist, it was probably Dwayne Gish, who said this eons ago, and it's just proliferated since then. No one has ever bothered to check. And I did a video on a recent paper that showed up that actually cataloged the exact representation of white sclera in natural populations. And I can't remember the exact number. It was like around 20%, I believe. Maybe a little bit less than that, maybe like 14, 20%, something along those lines, which is like a lot of individuals with white sclera. So to say that that apes don't have that is just tacitly lazy more than anything else, right? It's because you could just check this for yourself, and they don't bother.
Among all the great apes, white sclera shows or can show, but it's by a degree of percentages. It shows more often in people, or it shows to a greater degree in people, but it doesn't always show in all people, and it doesn't always show in all apes. So, or all other apes, I should say.
I mean, yeah, and I want to touch too. So they talk about, oh, we didn't find Lucy's hands and feet bones, which they like to say because they're worried, as
Let's
always.
wait till we get there. It's
Yeah.
coming. Almost everything you bring up is going to be 3 minutes from now.
Yeah. Okay. I'll stop. I'll stop on that. But they won't bring up the sclera thing again, I'm guessing. So yeah.
That's right.
The reason they show a lot of the transitional, like when you get to Australopiths, the reason why a lot of them are actually depicted with the white sclera is because by the time you reach Australopithecus, you've got things that are bipedal when they're on the ground. They're considerably weaker than their predecessors. Like humans, we're not particularly strong. We've got a lot more slow twitch muscle fibers than some of our kin today. And so one of the reasons why they tend to show them with the white sclera is because the thinking is that they're already pretty cooperative by the time you reach Australopithecus, and cooperation lends itself to gaze following. There's also the notion that the molecular clock comes into play for a lot of things like, diversity in the eyes, in the irises and in the sclera, as well as like fur coverage and things like that, taking that back in time and getting a range as to like when these things may have shown up more or less. So like, it's not guesswork, and it's certainly not intentional deceit, but something here is, isn't it?
I know that Lucy has some limitations. They didn't find much of her. But remember, Lucy is 3.2 million years old, and we have a few million years of ape to human progression since then.
Okay, tell me about the next million years. From, say, 3 million to 2 million years ago, what does the fossil record look like during that period?
The fossil record is quite sparse during that period.
How sparse?
Well, Dr. Kimball, the director of the Institute of Human Origins, said due to how rare the Homo fossils are from 2 to 3 million years ago, you could probably fit all of the fossils into a small shoebox and still have room for a good pair of shoes.
Don't you think that's an unusually long time to go without any supposed transitions between apes to humans?
I've spoken to Kimball, and I think you have as well, haven't you? I mean,
I never met Bill. Rest in peace. I never met Bill, but I do know very well one of Bill's students. And I've talked about this period of time between 2 to 3 million years ago, and it's known for being sparser than the periods immediately preceding it and in the periods immediately following it. But that being said, right, like some of our best fossils for the skulls of early genus Homo come from this time period, right? You get Canum 1813, the Homo habilis, which is this individual here. This is the whole thing, right? Like the whole thing was found. This is a skull. And when you compare it to Afarensis, the brain case size is like remarkably similar as far as how large it is. These guys had a range of like roughly late 500 cc's into like early 700 cc's, something like that. So dipping into getting over the halfway mark between humans. So it's got a teeny tiny, this specimen in particular has a teeny tiny little brain within the range of Australopiths. And yet the face is exceptionally modern in comparison, right? It's got a flatter, less prognathic face. The teeth are actually more derived. It's got a more derived brow ridge. The basic cranium itself is more derived. And the associated postcranium with Homo habilis is also considerably more derived. We have the feet from Homo habilis as well. They're always complaining about not having the feet, but some of our best preserved tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges come from a single specimen that is assigned to Homo habilis, and it's fully bipedal. So what's something that has the brain case the size of an Australopith, human-like teeth, a midway face, and a fully bipedal posture and locomotor style that's found exactly in this time period getting called scarce? Is my question, right? Like that seems to me to be a little bit it seems to me like it's being omitted, perhaps with intent, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But from this time period we also have Rudolfensis, which is another individual where we've got the full skull, right? Like this is a full piece. When I have fossils over here that I don't have when I'm completing them with bits that aren't complete, I black them out so that we know that for that specimen, it's not complete. But Rhodophensis and habilis, both two really nice skulls, right? Found right smack dab during this time period. This is around 2 to 1, something like that. But we do find the oldest Homo material as well from this time period at 2.8 million years ago. I think it is at, what is it? Is it Lothodic? It's not. That's not it. It's Gona. No, I can't remember. I can't remember where it's from, but it's from 2.8 million years ago. It's Homo spa, so species unknown, but it's definitely a member of Homo. It's got the teeth that clock it as such. So that's just some of the skulls that I have on my shelf behind me, right? Like from this time period, let alone the postcrania that we have that are from this time period and the other skulls and partial skulls from this period. We've got a lot of Paranthropus as well, right from here. Ethiopicus shows up here. Boisei shows up here. Robustus, not yet, I don't think. At least not in the area, South African hominin. But yeah, like to say that we got nothing going on in 2 to 3 million years ago is not right. It's incorrect. Certainly not as much as we had before and not as much as we have after. You have that in the fossil record, especially when you're looking at a period as brief as 7 million years that comprises hominin evolution. Nothing, I don't think so.
And everything he says, it talks about how diminished everything is and how pathetically small the amount was. When they predicted that Australopithecus was going to be found, it could have been the Africanus that was found the first time. That would have adequately fit Darwin's description, right? To an animal that was halfway between the apes that were known in his time, that it would be found in Africa, be halfway between the apes that were known in this time and the earliest people, which I think that they knew about Neanderthals by then, but that's it, right? So somewhere between there is where Darwin drew that line, and all of Australopithecus falls there. That genus, every species in that genus. So we find hundreds of individuals, and we can just dismiss all of them. Well, you didn't find much of that one, so we'll just pretend it's not a thing.
Well,
so
the
answer to the yes or no question, does that intermediate exist? The answer to that yes or no question is yes, it does. And it was predicted from the perspective that chimpanzees are already so close to us that there shouldn't be anything any closer unless we're related.
We are incredibly lucky with the material that we have. I mean, very few lineages are as full as the hominin lineage from 7 million years ago to now. And I think part of that's because we're narcissistic and we're looking. But part of it as well is because they're savanna dwelling animals, and savannas tend to preserve material a lot better than jungles do, because jungles have acidic soil, which is why the hominin fossil record is so much better than the Pannin or the Gorillan fossil records.
Or Gigantopithecus, for example.
Or Gigantopithecus, where all of the material we have from it, partial mandible and all the teeth, come from like pack rat dens, right? Because they're being pulled into limestone caves where they're preserved instead of getting dissolved by the acidic soil. But yeah, it's weird to me. They always leave out the skulls. They never, they're going to talk about Homo habilis in the Homo habilis section, and I know, again, not because I pre-watched it, but because I know they're pulling directly from Contested Bones for this series, and I've read all of Contested Bones many times. They're going to talk about Homo habilis, and again, they're going to just omit the fact that we have more than what they say we have. And they never talk about the transitional nature of the skulls either. So, when we're talking about Lucy, they'll be like, oh, it looks just like a chimpanzee. And, I study morphology.
Let's wait, because it's coming.
Okay.
It's one of the many things we're going to have to hit. And I don't want you to hit highway speed when we're about to hit all these things again.
Okay, hold on. Sharing the screen again.
So, Charles Darwin said, as by evolution theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? He also said, why is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory.
Darwin asked the rhetorical question and then answered it. And it's just like the quote that they always read for the evolution of the eye, to imagine that this had evolved. It sounds absurd, I admit. And then he spent 4 pages after that explaining what reason tells me. And then, of course, he goes into the explanation about how you wouldn't find every transition that ever existed, how you wouldn't find every individual animal, every father-son arrangement. You wouldn't, and no one geologic location wouldn't have the entirety of. He's explaining precisely how we understand that this would not be the case, or we wouldn't find it all one way. It's not going to be this simple. Reality tends not to be. And so there are different geologic stratas that are going to be able to retain certain things. And he, in detail, for quite a ways. And the people who read Darwin's book to take out these little sentences know what those other sentences are that they didn't take out. So they know when Darwin is explaining what the data actually shows and what reason tells me.
Well, and let's just appreciate the reality of how this kind of hashed out, right? Like when Darwin wrote Descent of Man and when he wrote Origin, right? Like when he had done this, we kind of didn't have any fossils for the hominin fossil record. We kind of didn't have fossils at all because it wasn't 100 years earlier that Cuvier was like, I think maybe things go extinct. And the reason he said that was because he was stumbling across mammoth remains, proboscideans in North America. And he was like, well, they're not here now, so something must have happened to them. It's like, you can't, this would be like starting a new field, right? Like, let's say you discover, life on Mars or something like that. And you're like, why aren't we finding life on every planet? And it's like, well, maybe because we've been looking for a fraction of 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 a percent of the time that like life has been around. The same is true here. During the 4.5 billion years worth of Earth's history, we've been looking for fossils for the past, 300 years, generously. It's not very long. And what does my heart good is to know that Darwin did eventually in his lifetime get to see this vindicated. He got to see Neanderthals. He got to see Archaeopteryx. And he was shown that indeed his transitional forms do exist when you look for them, right? I mean, there's a statistic I like to bring up when this quote comes around, which is that right now we're finding an average of 1 new species of dinosaur every week, right? Like, I don't think we were finding 1 dinosaur species a week when Darwin was writing Origin or Descent of Man, because he would have mentioned it, right? And because people are actually looking now. There's actually a cause to take a peek. And moreover, when Darwin wrote on the Descent of Man, and people don't, I say this knowing that the biological community lauds Darwin as the king of biology, as they probably should, but he still doesn't get enough credit for calling that human origins began in Africa. He was one of the first people on this, and he went against Arthur Keith and indeed many others who were like, no, because they had Piltdown for one, but they were also finding Homo erectus in Indonesia. So they were like, why would you propose Africa of all places? Us, modern Europeans, beginning life in Africa? It's like, that's absurd, they said. And then Raymond Dart found the Tong child, which I also have a model for, which is back here. And the Tong child was Australopithecus africanus. It's a kid, right? And yet it's more neonatal than it should be for its age if it were just another chimpanzee, which is what Arthur Keith thought for many years. And eventually Arthur Keith was won over. And I know this because I went to a symposium on Arthur Keith at the AABAs this year. And I know that the guy who lauded the Piltdown Man as the sort of proof that humans would have perhaps done a lot of their evolving in Europe and in the UK eventually was like, yeah, it looks like it happened in Africa. Looks like Dart's Australopiths truly are sitting pretty in that position of transitional species. But I've been rambling for 5 minutes and I completely forgot why we stopped, but I know it made me mad.
You seem to have come prepared with props and books just like I have.
I'm just trying to understand.
No, you're fucking not. You are trying to misunderstand and misrepresent. You are making a conscious effort not to get it because you don't want to get what you don't want to believe. You want to believe something else. You want to make believe something else.
Yeah. I like how they show at that point too, like the evil professor rallying the mean crowd to bully her for standing up for creationism in this auditorium that is clearly not a church.
I mean, when you look at the big picture, how many ape to human fossils are there, all in all?
Well, according to Dr. Tattersall, you could fit it all in the back of a pickup truck if you didn't mind how much you jumbled everything up.
All the evidence for the entire human line?
Yes, look, I'm not saying we have hundreds and hundreds of clear connections between ape-like creatures and humans. The record is in fact sparse. I'm admitting that. Look, watch this clip. I didn't show it during the presentation. This is the leading paleo expert, Dr. Berger, giving a speech at Google.
I'm a paleoanthropologist. I look for early human ancestors. I actually look for the rarest sought-after objects on the planet. I'm in a field of science that actually probably has more scientists in it than it does objects that we study. There are literally just a few thousand of these incredibly precious objects. Most of them are just fragments, tiny little bits and pieces. About 80% of the record of human origins in Africa represents isolated teeth. The remaining, say, 18% of that represents little bits and pieces of postcranial bones, of which we almost have had no complete elements from the neck down. Those skulls and stuff that you see on National Geographic and such, those are incredibly rare, number in just a few dozen.
All right, so there's the big picture.
So Lee Berger studies hominins. He does. He studies South African material. So he was the discoverer of Australopithecus sediba and Homo naledi, which he's still doing work on. And he's about to publish a book with John Hawkes here soon called Cave of Bones, which is interesting because creationists don't really know what to do with Australopithecus sediba, or with Homo naledi, excuse me. They don't know what to do with sediba either, but we'll get there when we get there. Yeah, like I don't think anybody is going to argue that the majority of the remains that we have for the hominin fossil record are teeth. Teeth are covered in enamel. It's the most likely element to preserve of any animal. I'm curious as to what they would say about like the number of dinosaur remains that are represented by teeth, because it's going to grossly dwarf the number of actual dinosaur skeletons that we have. And yet they don't have a problem with dinosaurs or their reconstructions, do they? They also completely missed the portion of what Lee says there, where he studies early human relatives. And we have dozens of skeletons, plural. Why did we only discuss Lucy if that's the case? And what's interesting is that Lee Berger, again, he discovered Australopithecus sediba, which you got to put a picture here of MH1 and MH2 to show how complete these two skeletons are, right? Not only with Australopithecus sediba were they nearly, complete skeletons in many ways, especially when you consider how they reflect across the midline, but sediba is interesting because we found many of the remains in articulation with one another. So literally articulating bone for bone in a way that they could hinge. And what I like to bring up is that sediba's pelvis looks like Lucy's pelvis. It's a biped, and it articulates with the last lumbar vertebra. The sacrum does with the last lumbar vertebra. So you have a clear picture of an animal that is a biped with articulating remains showing that it is in fact associated with a very clearly Australopith skull. So like, why aren't we talking about sediba, right? Why aren't we talking about any? They're not going to bring up Paranthropus, or if they do, they'll just hand wave it, even though Paranthropus is also clearly a biped. But they can't admit that these things are bipedal, because if they do, it's too transitional, right? They need it to be a quadruped. But just as a note there, right? Okay.
If they make such a big deal out of having whites of the eyes, imagine if it's walking bipedally.
Yeah, walking bipedally, using tools, because the oldest tools that we have, the Lamechwi stone tools, are associated with two hominins. Neither of them are genus Homo.
We're going to get there in a moment, and you'll be infuriated, I'm sure.
I'm sure. I'm already infuriated.
Now let's focus in on some of the points about Lucy to see how she fits in the human evolution tree. Overall, Lucy was about 3.5 feet tall and likely weighed about 64 pounds. To put that in perspective, female chimps are about the same height as Lucy and typically weigh between 70 and 100 pounds. But Lucy's body type was more similar to a pygmy chimp or a bonobo, which is a cousin to the chimp. They're about the same size as Lucy. Females average 3 feet 8 inches, and about 68 pounds.
So Lucy was basically the same height and weight as many chimps and most bonobos we see today in zoos?
Well, in many ways, she was very similar to a bonobo, but we believe she had several features that show she was becoming more human-like.
We believe that she had several features. Do the features exist, or do you have to make believe that they're there?
No, the features are about as solid as they could be, given they're made out of rocks at this point. They're literally fossils. This is something that I think is interesting, right? Like they're like, Lucy, she's the size of a chimpanzee. Lucy is a female of a highly sexually dimorphic hominin. Australopiths are not like Ardipithecus. Ardipithecus was monomorphic. The males and the females, same size canine teeth. The Australopiths, males and females have the same size canine teeth, but they're pretty dimorphic. Like most of the estimates are somewhere in between chimpanzee level dimorphic, with males being like 30% larger than females, to gorilla level dimorphic, with males being twice the size of females. If you look at the Katanumu, I think that's how you say it. I always mispronounce the big man fossil's name. But if you look at that particular specimen, he's like 5'5" or something like that. Like he's considerably larger than Lucy, which is a smaller female. So like Lucy is small because she's a female, and she's also small for a female, right?
That's going to come up in a moment.
Right. So the bottom line is like them being the same size as a chimpanzee, like, first of all, it doesn't matter, right? There are humans that are very small today. That doesn't mean that they're not humans. And we also have hominins that bridge the gap, growing in size, especially when you look at Homo habilis versus early Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, moving onward and upward. But like,
if you look at the parent category of Homo erectus, or what used to be called Pithecanthropus erectus, you look at the entire assemblage. We now see Homo erectus as a hugely diverse group spanning from Europe through Indonesia, and while we don't consider them different species thereof anymore, we can see that the incredible range from height and development and growth rates and a number of to the point that the idea that we have different races of people today is ridiculous. When you compare the diversity of Homo erectus, just that one subspecies, they knew diversity. We don't.
I mean, you could talk about, I think the biggest killer for race as a biological concept is our genetic diversity, which is just in the pits, right? Like the two most disparate humans on the planet are still more similar than the average two chimpanzees that you pluck out of the jungle. Like we are just ridiculously similar to one another.
People don't realize that there are 4 distinct lineages of chimpanzees.
Oh yeah.
Like different four would you call them subspecies or deems, or I'm not sure what the category is, but they're genetically distinct, isolated.
We call them subspecies, but they are genetically distinct and they're behaviorally distinct as well. Western and Eastern chimps behave very similar, and that's not even taking Panpaniscus into account, which Panpaniscus, the bonobo, is as different from the chimpanzee as we are to Neanderthals. And I'm firmly a splitter with regard, Neanderthals are a separate species. I think as insofar as we can use species to define things, I think that they are unique enough, which just is mind-boggling because like genetically speaking, they are outside of our range. That's the support I use. They're about 99.
You're sure that Neanderthals were not just an old man with rickets?
Oh yeah, we'll get to that. And what's funny is that they're like, we don't have enough fossils for Australopithecus, and then they're like, yeah, but Neanderthals were just old men with rickets. And it's like, if you think we have a lot of Australopiths, the number of Neanderthals we have is insane. And no, not all of them have rickets.
Men, women, children.
They're old.
All showing these consistent traits.
All old men with rickets, whether they're, in the Altai Mountains or far to the west, or it just doesn't. Anyways. Okay.
Let's start with the head and we'll work our way down to her toes.
Lucy's complete skull is shown in museums and school textbooks across America. But did they actually find her skull?
No, but we did find these skull fragments.
So these few brown pieces are what they actually found, and the rest is, well, imagined?
I wouldn't go that far.
But did they find the white parts?
No.
So how can they not be imagined?
She says, did you find the skull? He says, no. All we found were fragments. Fragments of what? The skull. So did you find the skull?
The thing is about this is that it's like, again, like, I don't know how many times we can go over this, right? Like, yes, like Lucy's skull is relatively fragmentary. So how do we know how to fill in the pieces? Because of all the other skulls we found, and because there's only so many ways to fill in a skull, right? Like if you have, I think that this is a good example for Australopithecus here, right? Like you got this little absent piece here. This part in gray is the portion that's missing, right? First of all, if you look at the front, we've got significantly more of the right half than the left, my right, than the left. But everything mirrors down the midline, right? So if you're missing this little part right here and you have both pieces that are adjacent and you have the teeth, you've got the entire circumference around this missing portion. I think you can guess with pretty decent certainty what that missing piece looks like. Or how about this portion where we're missing the actual zygomatic arch? Well, that's weird because you've got the portion of the zygomatic bone and you've got the portion of the temporal bone. So boy, it's not like it's going to do a loop-de-loop out here, right? Like there's only one way for it to fill in. And it's like this for the vast majority of these skulls. The pieces that are missing aren't filled in willy-nilly. They're filled in because there's not that many ways they could be filled in, intuitively speaking and anatomically speaking. Like morphologically, there's not many ways it could go. But more importantly than that, in my opinion, is again, we have other skulls, right? Like this is Australopithecus africanus, right? I showed it earlier. This is Mrs. Ples. The whole thing looks like this. This is the whole skull. There's not any missing pieces to it to fill in. We have the whole thing. So when you've got something like this and you compare it to Lucy, they're members of the same genus. This is like saying if you found portions of like a tiger skull that you couldn't fill in missing portions in a lion that you had only bits and pieces, or a lion that you had the full skull of. You got the full lion, parts of the tiger. Filling in the parts of the tiger if you've got the full lion isn't going to be very difficult because, again, they're the same genus. So one, you can fill in the bits of the skulls that are missing because anatomy only works in a specific way, right? Like things aren't going to be wildly misproportionate. Two, you have other skulls that are members of the same genus. And three, you have other skulls that are members of the same species to help you fill it in. So like, but this is why they only talk about Lucy, because if they talked about anything else, they would bust themselves and we would be out of the job.
Besides, don't you think her skull looks very similar to a modern bonobo skull?
I see what you're saying. I mean, Lucy's discoverers said Lucy's skull was almost entirely missing. So knowing the exact size of Lucy's brain was the crucial bit of missing evidence. But from the few skull fragments we had, it looks surprisingly small. Later estimates reveal that Lucy's brain was just 1/3 the size of the human brain, making her brain about the average size of the average chimp.
So just what is it about her skull that makes her anything but an ape?
What do you want me to say?
Well, what I want you to say is I want you to explain how evolution happened, how it wasn't that we started with chimpanzee bodies that suddenly grew big brains, which had, what people used to believe. It turns out we started as chimpanzee kind of like things. Whoa, had to sneeze at a bad time. We started as chimpanzee-like things, and then the bodies grew into a more human form before the brain did.
Yeah, I mean, so that was the original question, right? Is that the question was like, what are the two big things that separate us from other extant apes? It's how we move, so we're upright, and big brains. We got brains that are just way too big for our body size, and that's like hugely metabolically costly. So the question was like, okay, were we big-brained tree dwellers, or were we bipedal pinheads? Which came first? And Piltdown, when it was initially discovered, was like we were big-brained apes, and then Piltdown was nonsense, so people kept looking, and it was Raymond Dart again. We see the return of the Tong child, which is a pin-headed biped. So it became very clear that bipedalism evolved first. Of course, this was known like even before Lucy. Lucy was a nice additional find to support that, but bipedalism first was appreciated, I believe, quite a bit before Lucy was discovered, and that has only continued to come to fruition. Now, it's funny that they say like, she's just got a chimp-like brain. the Australopith range dips above the chimpanzee range today. They crest like 555 cc's, which does get above the range for chimps, which is like 350 to 450, something along those lines. So 100 cc's, that's nothing to look down and turn down your nose at. But more importantly, the face of Australopiths is just very different from what we see from other extant apes that are non-human. So they're less prognathic, and most importantly, it's their dentition. The canines are tiny. They've got dwarfed canines. Their canine teeth have reduced. And this is something that started right around Australopithecus, Ardipithecus cadava and into Ardipithecus remedis. So reduction of the canine teeth, less prognathic face, slightly bigger brain, and anterior foramen magnum with a forward position. So 4 things that are comprise quite a few craniofacial characteristics distinguish this from chimpanzees. And as you said, we didn't evolve from chimpanzees anyways. We evolved from Miocene apes. And one thing that I try to bring up to my students as often as possible is chimpanzees have been evolving for just as long as we have. Panins, gorillans, pongins, all of those guys have been evolving on their own track in unique environmental pressures for just as long as we've been. So they have derived characteristics that we don't have. So our hands, for instance, particularly our thumbs, are quite primitive compared to what the chimpanzee thumb looks like. Chimpanzees have dwarfed their thumb and shortened it. We retain the long thumb that proconsul Africanus and proconsul major have, and we've accepted it for precision grip, which is cool, but that is the primitive condition. It's because we don't knuckle walk. We don't need shortened thumbs, and we can keep long thumbs and chimpanzees. Let me back up. Chimpanzees have short thumbs and long metatarsals or metacarpals, and we have the opposite condition, long thumbs and short metacarpals. And that's because we use our hands for gripping. They need to all be able to touch, and they use theirs primarily for knuckle walking. And so we've got 2 distinct conditions that have evolved from an ancestral condition that we saw in something like proconsul africanus or proconsul major or Akembo nyanzae or Akembo hesseloni. The point being, we didn't evolve from a freaking chimpanzee. We've both been evolving in different directions. And yes, Lucy's species and her genus do have distinct characteristics craniofacially that distinguish them from chimps.
Yes, there's a lot of controversy about her skull. Some anthropologists believe her skull's very ape-like, while others convinced it's more human-like.
Absolutely not. What controversy? Who is saying this? Name me one. Bring me the one anthropologist who's saying that there's controversy in the Australopith face. Now, what I think is going on here is I think they don't know what they're talking about. I think they've genuinely misunderstood the fact that Australopith faces have some portions that are basal, more apish, quote unquote, and some portions that are more derived, more human-like. Not that people are disagreeing on it, but of course that's not surprising because I don't think any of these guys could actually read the technical literature, as it were.
Nor would they if they had the opportunity. They're not interested in understanding. They are interested in misunderstanding. That's the thing that amazes me about these apologists. I've had people admit to me, these may be what the facts are, but I prefer to believe this. If they don't care what the facts are, then they don't care what the truth is. They want to believe what they want to believe. And they will tell me very often, they say, well, why does it have to be true before I believe it? Why can't I believe what I want to believe? So all they're doing here is deliberately misrepresenting the science. And yes, we know that is deliberate because we've seen it demonstrated over and over and over again. They are deliberately misrepresenting the science so that they can preserve their faith in a weird kind of afterlife. I don't know what the issue is, if they're afraid of death or whatever the problem is. But mainstream Christians apparently don't have a problem accepting evolution because they're not biblical literalists. They can take the interpretation that a God exists who maybe isn't quite the way that the young Earth creationists depict it. That maybe God allowed, like the Bible says, let the earth bring forth, after their kind. That's a nice summary description of evolution. It gets the details wrong, But if you want to believe all of that, fine, believe all of that. Just don't get to the point where you have to deny the science and start lying in favor of the dogma.
This is exactly how I feel about it, right, Arn? I mean, I know some excellent folks who are anthropologists, who are religious, and they make it work, and like that's perfectly fine by me. I don't share the same belief, but that I don't really care, because we're doing good science together and we're learning new things together. And as far as I'm concerned, that's perfectly fine. The problem, as you said, comes when young Earth creationism, or even old Earth creationism that does the evolution denial, or intelligent design, where you have to maintain an active tinkerer. All three of those become problematic at different levels, of course. I mean, I'm going to have a lot more in common with like I get along perfectly well with Fuzz Rana, who's an intelligent design advocate, right? We disagree on a lot of stuff, but we agree on more. A young Earth creationist I share very little with, and in fact, usually the only thing we can agree on is that the Earth isn't flat, and some of them will push back on that too. So, you run into some issues there. But like, I find it so interesting that it's the young Earth creationists that are trying so hard to say that the science supports them. They can't just say, fine, it's a miracle, right? God did all this, and he snapped his fingers and he wiggled his pinky and made it happen. They can't admit
his arm and blinked, but
yeah, so they can't just say that, right? Like they don't want evolution. They don't want God to use evolution or the Earth to be very ancient. But at the same time, they don't want to go, whole hog into the supernatural. And I don't understand that. And I mean, to be frank, I do. The reason is because they want to put it back in schools. And if they admit that there's miracles involved, then they can't shoehorn it into the science classroom. But functionally. And the weird thing is that like at some point you're going to run into a miracle, right? Like they have to use a miracle for their flood. The flood has to be miraculous.
A miracle?
Yeah. Well, right now what they're doing is I don't know if you saw this, but the heat problem is my favorite like slam dunk for young Earth creationism. And recently AIG just released another paper where they are like, so we're looking at large igneous provinces and blah, 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 blah. And it's like a 1,000,000-page long technical literature, although, I use that term loosely. And then at the end, they're like, so the heat, if we're using the ocean as like a heat sink, you can get like 0.04% of the heat to go away. So that's still like 99.06% of the heat. Therefore, the solution was probably miraculous. That is their conclusion in the Answers Research Journal, a paper released like 4 or 5 days ago, maybe a week ago. The solution was probably miraculous. And it's like, at that point, just say the whole thing. Like, God just made the Earth old and everything's, a miracle and whatever and whatever and whatever. Because like, it just doesn't matter. Once you open the door for that, the rest doesn't matter. And I don't care anymore either. It's not fun for me anymore when they're like, oh, it's just miraculous. Because how am I going to argue with that? I'm like, okay, sure. If you believe that, I mean, you're wrong, but sure.
May I? Lucy's claim to fame is that she supposedly walked upright, like we do. But how could she walk upright when studies show that the spine of her species entered the base of her skull at an angle, just like chimps today? Also, her face was totally sloped like a chimp's. That certainly wouldn't have helped.
Notice how she's holding that stick right now. She's got it cranked all the way forward to give even the slightest illusion of an angle. Let's see if I have, do I have like a stick or something I can use for this?
But that looks pretty erect already, doesn't it?
Yeah, but look, I can do this with a human. I can stick my fingers into the human and force it to give you an angle as well, right? Like the importance is the comparison to show the position and the angle together. We're not getting a ventral view. She won't show it. She's not going to show it. So I've never seen that so flagrantly said in my life. I've never heard them argue that studies show that Lucy walked like a chimpanzee because of the foramen magnum. So like we have to break this down for a second, right? Because first of all, what she's saying there with the model that she's using is that based solely on Lucy, because that's what they're arguing, right? Is that Lucy's all we have, that based off of Lucy, they couldn't walk upright because of the position and angle of the foramen magnum. Lucy's specimen didn't preserve the foramen magnum. So what the hell is she talking about? There's nothing to compare. So then she turns around and, you know, they love the other specimens when they think they can use them for their point, but not for everything else. Now I'll tell you, like, I'm really familiar with the literature on foramen magnum stuff because of how often I talk to creationists. I don't personally know of any study, especially in the past 5 years, that shows that she walked like a chimpanzee on the basis of the foramen magnum. I don't know of a single one. And like, I don't even need to prove that to you. I can just turn this upside down again and show you the difference between a human, or excuse me, between Australopithecus and something like a human. Right? The foramen magnum, when you hold them side by side with their palates in line with one another, it's in the same place. Compare that to a chimp, right? Like, let's because I got a chimp skull here too, a knuckle walker, right? No, it's pretty freaking different, isn't it? So how are you going to make that argument? Period. Like with that specimen, it can't be done. But in
The
general,
way they make that argument is by, and you know that Biddle has done this in previous episodes of this series, in the whole Genesis apologetic series that he's done. They said a couple of times in different episodes that Australopithecus afarensis was a knuckle walking ape. They've come out and said that she was fully quadruped. And so when they say that studies show this, they mean their own fucking denial of studies. That's the studies they're talking about. It looks like an ape to me, therefore. That's what they're quoting.
well, and you know, I like to be charitable. Like, that's my whole thing, right? Like, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I really do. But I don't know. They have a chimp replica. It's probably from bone clones right there. If they wanted to make their point, just turn them upside down and show us. But they're not going to do that, are they? Because they know the second they show us the inferior viewer of those skulls, we are going to see the difference between the foramen magnum of those two animals. And they definitely won't show all three, because then you'll see exactly how intermediate and indeed how just about to the human condition we are by the time we're at Australopithecus. That is, I've never seen anything that flagrant with regard to the foramen magnum stuff. And like, I've covered a lot of young creationist stuff with regard to the Lucy material. That's a.
So let's look at the 2 versus 3. This is important. This is interesting, I think. A lot of creationists will say that these two things are not the same, because if you only have 2 of them, you can distinguish differences, right? You can compare any 2 things and find a difference. That's all you want to do is find a difference. But the problem is when you get 3 of them, because then the Sesame Street refrain comes up. One of these things is not like the other. And even in cases where that doesn't happen, you end up with a transition, like you said, from chimpanzee to Australopithecus to human. And that we can't, if the game is that we can't admit transitions, then you definitely can never show 3.
Well, I'll tell you this, right? Like, something that I've noticed is that you got a lot of younger creationists, with the PhDs, and they've got these kind of vague specialties. But there are younger creationists, geologists, and geneticists, and stuff like that. There's not one biological anthropologist. Not one. There's not one. There's general paleontologists. They always specialize in like insects or something like that, something that is clearly not mammal. Why do you think that is? And I think,
go ahead.
I think it's because everyone that tries sees it for themselves, and then they become, theistic evolutionists or intelligent design advocates or something or the other, because it's simply impossible to square with a young Earth creationist perspective, at least as far as I'm concerned. And the ones who do, like, you get like Todd Wood, for example. Todd Wood is like, you got like the young Earth creationist. He's like the most progressive as far as the young Earth creationists go. He accepts the human-chimp genome similarity. He thinks that Australopithecus was bipedal. Like, he's good with all of that, whatever. And then, of course, the next question is, well, what's going on there? And he, to his credit, will be like, I don't know, right? Like, he's still a young Earth creationist. I don't understand how a guy like that with his education and intelligence is, but whatever, maybe he's got something.
So we mentioned before that Answers in Genesis and other creationist organizations like this presumably have actual scientists on their employ. Now, what they don't tell you is if you want to be a scientist for Answers in Genesis, there's this questionnaire that is available on their website, so you can look it up and see, where you have to attach not just your resume for your scientific credentials and all of that, but you also have to have a statement from your pastor verifying that you are in fact a Christian, and you have to read their statement of faith, and the statement of faith denies science. It says that any scientific fact that contradicts the Bible is not a fact. You have to take the Bible as fact and reject everything else that contradicts it. And you have to write it. You have to swear to affirm that, their statement of faith. So if you sign on to Answers in Genesis, you have to provide a statement from your pastor attesting to the fact that you really do believe this horse shit. And you have to swear to never contradict the statement of faith, no matter what the scientific data turns out to be, even if it's something discovered in the future. So that no matter how true the truth really is, no amount of proof will ever change their minds. And this is because there are some people who, for whatever reason, decide that they don't like reality anymore. Andrew Snelling, for example, who published to actual geological journals while simultaneously publishing to the organization that would become Answers in Genesis. Yes. At the same time, he's dating the Kungora rock formation in the billions of years, and he's also writing for this creationist magazine where he says that all the fossils are the result of the flood. This is the same guy publishing completely different, mutually exclusive conclusions, wherein on the science side, he goes in through all of the details on which types of radiometric isotopes that he used and all that perfectly legitimate science, and then made up horse shit. Whatever happens in the minds of some people that make them that makes a scientist decide, I'm going to throw away my Harvard education and go to work for Answers in Genesis, like Kurt Wise, who famously cut a Bible up with a pair of scissors for all the things that can't be true if science is true. And rather than realize, oh, well, this, now I've got 9,000 tons of proof of that this is horse shit. Instead, he threw away his Harvard degree.
Well, and Tompkins did the same thing, right? And I want to bring something to the attention of people who might not know this, but the Answers in Genesis organization has, and so does ICR, and I believe CMI does as well. They have their journal, right? And as you said, to work there, you have to sign a statement of faith. Well, you also have to sign an agreement to publish in the journal that you're doing from a younger perspective, et cetera, et cetera. And, I talked about, I don't know when this video is going to come out, but I assume my Tompkins video will be out before then because it's finally finished. And I was talking with Glenn Williamson. Glenn was the guy who found out that Jeffrey Tompkins had a bug in his BLAST software that he was using to get the 70% genomic similarity between humans and chimps. Glenn figured out there was a bug in the software. So what Glenn decided to do is what young Earth Christians are always yelling at secular folks to do, which is, why don't you publish in our journal? We're not biased like the evil, mean secular journals who won't publish our work, but we will publish your work. Publish in the ARJ. So Glenn tried. He submitted a manuscript and even edited and resubmitted it after it was reviewed by Jeffrey Tompkins, the guy who he's criticizing. That's who his reviewer was, one of his reviewers, him and Nathaniel Jeanson. He resubmits it. They tell him that they're not going to publish it. And then Tompkins publishes on the exact same thing, saying an anomaly was detected in the BLAST software. Says he reaches the same conclusion. And I'll talk about why all of that is wrong, in my video, although, spoiler alert, because he uses an ungapped parameter. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, you can't, it's all a facade, all of it, right? You can't publish it. They're exactly as picky as they claim that secular journals are. But the annoying thing is secular journals don't require you to sign a statement of faith, do they? So in actuality, they're worse than even the straw man of the bad guy that they created.
Our spine enters into the middle of the base of our skull at a relatively straight angle so that we can walk upright with ease and turn our heads as we walk. But in both chimps and Lucy's kind, the spine enters more towards the rear of the skull and comes in slanted, forcing her to walk hunched over so she can see where she's going.
I'm going to be brief here, but again, you'll notice how short the shots were, and you'll notice that we didn't get anything ventral, anything anterior, or anything ventral of the anterior position. So like, I'll just show again, right? So like, here's the difference between a human and a chimp. They're quite unique. So I'm going to remove the human. I'm going to pick up Africanus, Mrs. Ples, the specimen, and show you the difference. There we go.
Yeah, and
You
this
can
is what
see-
the pallets. And this is what their pallets aligned in both
This
cases.
is what the pallets aligned, right? Like this is not, there's no, and then, you know, just for example's sake, let's remove the chimp and show the human again.
Yep.
It's intermediate.
Yeah,
mean,
they're more prognathtic, but that's the only appearance that pushes that back.
Even with the prognathic nature, I'm going to use the Lucy reconstruction or the Afarensis reconstruction for this. Even with the faces, and the faces are quite similar, some of the big differences have to do with the canines and the morphology of the teeth. The shape of the palate is another huge difference. You've got more parabolic palate in Afarensis here, and then you can of course see
much bigger teeth.
Well, because they've have molarized, they partially molarized their premolars, but they're mostly eating tougher foodstuffs. But even holding this, you can see again the difference between the location of the foramen magnum. I mean, it's just it really gets my goat how they did that little interaction there, because it's just so clearly.
So they were the skull that you were having, were they those were with the larger molars, were they eating C4 plants? Is that the one? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, so Afarensis, it depends on the location. Some populations of Afarensis are C4 invested and some are C3 invested. But given Afarensis is considered to be the root of Homo and Paranthropus, Homo being a C3 generalist and Paranthropus being a C4 specialist, it makes quite a bit of sense. If you look at the difference between Ardipithecus, which actually I have it right here, Ardipithecus's teeth are a lot more similar to a human's or to a chimpanzee, with the sort of bunodont low-cusp molars that are small, like relatively little. But it seems like molars get big in Australopithecus and then they get small again in Homo, but not for the same reasons, right? So they get big in Australopithecus because Anamensis is exploiting a wider range of resources than was capable of Ardipithecus that included C4 plants. And then what happens when they decrease again is the incorporation of meat and tools to process food. So they shrink not because not because of any like really big diet change on its own, but because we're using tools to shrink basically the entire dental arcade, because we don't need the teeth as much anymore.
Gotcha.
And that's why you see the shrinking of the teeth occur right when tools show up in the fossil record, right? Lomequi shows up 3.3. Habilis already has smaller molars by 2.8. 500,000 years. The teeth have already shrunk. And I can actually show that as well. So here's Habilis. There's the molars on Habilis, and we'll do Afarensis. See the difference in the molar size?
Yep.
I mean, it's pretty easy to chart, honestly. The teeth are like the teeth are so diagnostic because we have so many of them. Like you just sack loads of teeth.
I also understand that the semicircular canals in Lucy's species would have made it really difficult to walk on two legs. Have you heard about that?
No, not yet, but I'm sure you would enjoy enlightening me.
May I use your laptop to pull something up?
Be my guest.
Well, humans and apes have 3 semicircular canals embedded deep within their ears to keep balanced while moving. Scientists have learned from the skull scans of other Australopithecines that they were best suited for walking occasionally on 2 feet, just like chimps do today.
So the semicircular canals, aspects of them are more similar to arboreal primates today, and other aspects are more similar to bipedal terrestrial primates like humans and other hominids. But the most important thing there is the comparison to like chimpanzees occasionally walking upright. The most bipedal panin is bonobos, and they spend like a maximum of 2 to 3% walking bipedally. What they do a lot however, is hold an orthograde posture while they're feeding. So they'll stand upright, but walking upright is very difficult for them. However, the actual differences, morphologically speaking, between the semicircular canals of hominins, like humans and others, and chimpanzees, it's not that extreme, right? We're both moving on a similar substrate. Chimpanzees aren't like exceptionally arboreal compared to humans. They are more arboreal, but they're also humans who can still get along quite well in the trees for foraging purposes and things of that nature. So what I would say to this is like, yeah, some aspects of the semicircular canals are more similar to knuckle-walking primates, knuckle-walking apes that live today, and other aspects are more similar to humans. That kind of sounds transitional, doesn't it?
Dr. Wood's study revealed that the semicircular canals of Lucy's kind were more like those of chimps than modern humans, and suggested that Lucy's species would not have been restricted to walking on 2 feet. Other studies in the Scientific American have found that the semicircular canals of Lucy's kind resemble those of African apes today. It seems like she was much better equipped for living in trees, like chimps today.
Yeah, okay, last thing on the semicircular canals, you'll notice what she said is, when quoting from the paper, that the semicircular canals that is found in Australopithecus, and again, they didn't get this from Lucy because Lucy's skull was not complete enough to pull semicircular canals from it, but they won't actually mention the specimen that they pulled the semicircular canals from, because that would be too problematic. They would have to deal with the rest of the skull that surrounds the semicircular canal, so they're not going to bring that up. But what I will say about that is that the quote was, it does not restrict Lucy to life on the ground. No one says that, except maybe Owen Lovejoy, like, I don't know, 20 years ago. I don't believe he even holds that position today. The adaptations that we find in Australopiths gives them the ability to like maneuver quite easily in the trees when they were up in the trees, and they can also move quite efficiently on the ground. The entire suite of their morphology suggests that they were spending more time on the ground than in the trees, but they do retain adaptations that would have allowed them to get around okay, arboreally speaking. And with this in mind, you would make a prediction, right? You would think, okay, well, the environment of these animals must have been something that was primarily free of tree cover, with some patches of trees, right? Like a sparse woodland. And wouldn't you know it, that's what we find as the environment that these Australopiths are primarily inhabiting, is an environment that still has trees, but is by and large more well suited for an animal that could get around terrestrially. And when Lucy was on the ground, as evidently they just copped to, she was moving bipedally. So this is interesting that they're not taking like the AIG stance that she was a knuckle walker, but maybe that will come later. We'll see.
So now moving on from her head, what's that little bone at the bottom of her skull?
Well, that bone is not supposed to be there any longer.
What do you mean it's not supposed to be there?
Excuse me. That's her thoracic vertebrae, and scientists learned about 5 years ago that it belonged to an extinct relative of the baboon called the Australopithecus dartii, a common ape-like creature around when Lucy was alive. It didn't belong to Lucy or her species.
Then how did it get mixed in with Lucy's skeleton?
We're not sure, but remember, Lucy is made up of hundreds of broken bone pieces that were scattered across a hillside, and they screened 20 tons of dirt over 50 square meters to be sure they collected everything. So I guess it accidentally got included with her fossil.
If this is the case, then why haven't you removed the bone from her display case?
We just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Have any other natural history museums removed it?
No, none that I'm aware of.
This chick thinks this is all just a bunch of guesswork. Who does she think she is?
I know, but the docent doesn't seem to be giving any solid evidence to support his claims.
So it's true. A thoracic vertebra was initially included with the individual that is assigned to Lucy. And what's interesting, and I didn't know this until relatively recently, but Johansen and colleagues actually didn't think that it should be included. The reason was because it had a different texture and a relatively different shape as compared to basically the rest of the individual. But more importantly, the anatomy of a thoracic vertebra is actually like pretty conserved, and it is very difficult to tell the primate from which a thoracic vertebra came from outside of size. And what you'll remember is that Lucy is like 3.3, 3.5 feet tall. She's quite small for a hominin. And Australopithecus dartii, as they talked about there, it's actually not a relative of a baboon. It is, but it's more closely related to modern gelatas, Australopithecus gelata. And they were really big. So it's like approximately the same size and weight of Lucy. It wasn't an ape-like creature, as they said. It's like firmly a Papuan, right? Like it's a monkey. But I hope I'll send you, Aaron, after this. I want to send you a picture to put up like while we're talking about this, because the anatomy of the thoracic vertebra, as I said, is like super, super similar across basically all of your catarrhine primates. It is very difficult to tell the difference between a thoracic vertebra from any two given primates of the same size, simply because the thoracic vertebra does such an important job of articulating with the rib cage, and it maintains an ideal structure for that that's pretty similar amongst quadrupedal and bipedal primates alike. But like, yeah, a mistake did happen here, right? Like this was included with Lucy's specimen, and like it was a big oopsie. The interesting thing about the fact that this vertebra was included, this thoracic vertebra, is that because it was a mistake, and mistakes happen in science, that's its greatest strength, is that when mistakes happen, it can adapt and change in light of new information. This caused a lot of scrutiny to be applied to other individuals and assemblages of individuals. And now we have greater confidence that the bones that are assigned to given individuals do in fact belong to the same individual organism. And at the very least, the same species. So yes, I'm okay with this. I think it's a good thing. Now, as far as them saying that like the bones are still included in the display, I don't know where they got that from. As far as I'm aware, the picture that was shown on the screen was like the same picture from the article that initially, like the science communication article that initially communicated the results of a study. So like, yeah, they would include the picture in there that has the bone that is being studied in question present in the photo. I don't know if, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's been removed and has been removed from the display case ever since the discovery was made. But, you know, I guess I won't get my hopes up that they're going to show us a source, huh?
What about her wrists and hands? Were they like those of apes or humans?
They were quite ape-like. I mean, over 20 years after Lucy was found, some scientists discovered that Lucy had the same kind of locking wrists, with ledges and notches that are classic features of knuckle-walking apes.
And we don't have locking wrists.
Correct. It's only found in apes that walk using both their hands and feet. The fingers of Lucy's species were quite curved and ape-like, even by ape standards, and best suited for swinging in trees.
Okay, so a couple of things here. There is one guy who once proposed that Lucy was capable of knuckle walking, the individual, based off of portions of the radius ulna and the humerus. And it was Brian Richmond, and no one buys that. And the reason is because, like, this seems coincidental, but I actually, one of my colleagues who's a PhD student right now, she studies hands. That's specifically what she studies, is the morphology of hands. So all of the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. And she told me that the hand community for hominins and primates in general, they don't buy that Lucy even has like the faint indications of a wrist knuckle or a wrist locking, knuckle walking mechanism. Now, I study Miocene apes, so I study the apes that precede Lucy, and by quite a bit, by I don't know, half a dozen million years plus. We don't have a single, not one, Miocene ape that knuckle walks. Not a single one of them is capable of knuckle walking, which suggests that from a conventional science perspective, that knuckle walking evolved after the split between humans and chimps, and that it actually evolved separately in gorillas and chimpanzees. And as additional support for this, chimpanzees and gorillas have different kinds of methods for knuckle walking. So the facet that allows for the walking to occur is unique in gorillas versus chimpanzees. So I don't think it's a fair thing to say that like Lucy was a knuckle walker, because as far as I know, nobody besides Brian Richmond thinks that, and I don't even know that Brian Richmond still thinks that. Nobody knows.
And importantly, orangutans do not knuckle walk. They do fist walking. So it's, again, different from the gorillas, different from the chimpanzees. And so we have three of the great apes who, when they come out of the trees from a basal position, which is illustrated by gibbons and siamangs, they're fully bipedal when they come out of the trees. And it's just these heavier bodied ones appear to have resorted to a quadrupedal posture and adopted these two different methods. And one of the two different methods they did in two different styles. But that we apparently never knuckle walked.
Well, because picture it this way, right? You have all of these Miocene apes, and again, like this is literally what I study is Miocene apes. That's going to be my area of expertise. And because I'm studying for my comps right now, I'm very fresh on the locomotor styles of all of the Miocene apes. And I know Carol Ward, David Begun, I know Alba, I know all of these guys. I've met them at conferences. And I can tell you, there is not one knuckle-walking Miocene ape. And the later Miocene apes do what's called, at least Danuvius does, it's called bipedal extended limb clambering. So it's basically sitting up in the trees and it's moving around bipedally using its arms as additional supports as it walks on top of the branches of trees. And Danuvius was found in Germany. It's really, really interesting. So like there's quite a bit of support for the fact that you've got an orthograde, but either suspensory or, suspensory clamberer that is the ancestor of the African apes and ultimately including Pongo in that as well. But like, here's the more important thing. And here's what I think is the slam dunk to this argument. We have other Australopiths that preserve the material relevant for knuckle walking. And no one has ever followed up with that other material in favor of knuckle walking. No one has ever done that. And the reason is because that facet doesn't exist. Right, it's faint in Lucy. It's non-existent in these other animals as far as the knuckle walking walk mechanism goes. So not in Sediba, it's not in Garhi. Actually, I don't think we have the relevant material for Garhi. So it's not in Sediba, it's not in Africanus, and it's not in other specimens of Australopithecus afarensis either. So we'll move on with that. I'm going to add one more thing to that. Lucy also doesn't have the proper hand proportions for knuckle walking. She doesn't have the shortened thumb in addition to the long metacarpals. So that's another thing. But okay, I'm going to change over.
What about her feet?
Well, they didn't find any of Lucy's foot or toe bones.
Well, that sure didn't stop them from putting feet on her in basically every natural history museum in America.
That's because they found a couple of hundred bones in another location that represented 13 to 17 or so creatures they believe were her same species. And some of those were foot or toe bones, maybe enough to put into a lunchbox.
So the thing about the feet is interesting here, right? Like the implication is that we found these other postcrania relevant to the foot. So the tarsals, the metatarsals, and the phalanges, and like they might be related to Lucy's kind.
From other creatures that we believe might be the
right, exactly. And it's like, we know that they're Australopiths because they're found alongside other diagnostically Australopith remains, first of all. But my favorite thing to bring up with this is the Dakika child, which is a partial skeleton, including the skull with the still articulated cervical vertebra coming out of it. It's a kid, but it is an Australopithecus afarensis kid. And we got the foot for that thing too. And the toe is in line, right? And the arches are suggestive, but you typically, it's hard to use the foot of a kid for the arches just because there's a lot of development going on there. But the toe is in line. So like we have a foot associated with what is definitively an Australopith that has the inline toe. And I don't know why they have such a hard time with this concept. And like the answer is I do know why they have a hard time with it because they're not considering it intentionally. But also like there's a nice metatarsal that I think Carol Ward has done work on before. Anyways, it's like a classic biped metatarsal. Like imagine thinking that you can't from a bone in the foot infer the locomotion from it. But all of that pales into comparison to trackways, which corroborate the morphology of the feet that we have. And I want to talk about this too, even though it's not Australopithecus afarensis, we have the foot of STW573, who I talked about earlier, who's called Littlefoot because the foot is preserved. It's in line. Like, I don't know what to tell you, right? But I mean, to this day, I've not heard one creationist discuss STW573. I've not seen it happen. So maybe we'll spur something here and they'll call it a mix. It's a mix of human and ape bones. That's what their new thing is to say for Australopithecus sediba. It's a conglomeration in a bone bed. They're accidentally articulated, and a human and an Australopith were running at top speed at one another and just happened to quantum tunnel into each other and create a mix, a fake skeleton. Okay, I'm going to switch this back. That's only a hair better than the devil put the fossils there to trick me,
They also found some footprints called the Laetoli footprints. They believe they were made by Lucy's species.
Where did they find them, and Did they date about the same time as Lucy's fossils?
They found them in Tanzania, about 1,000 miles away, and they dated the footprints to about 500,000 years older than Lucy's bones.
I'm sorry, it's just...
I had no
That's
idea the
quite a
case for
story.
human evolution was so weak.
It's not weak. She's just not relying on science.
Even if they did have Lucy's feet, based on the size of her species, how well would they fit into the footprints found at Laeteli?
Now, that's a hot topic because experts agree that the footprints they found looked human. I mean, completely human. And some of them were quite long, like over 10 inches. In modern terms, that equates to a 9.5-foot shoe size and a person about 5 feet 9 inches, probably made by a male.
How tall was Lucy again?
About 3.5 feet tall.
But that doesn't make any sense. They believe that Lucy was a full-grown female at only 3.5 feet tall. But they say that a male of her species was 5'9" and made the footprints with a massive 10-inch feet. That's like 65% taller than the female version. I'm not buying it. Sounds more like the human footprints were made by humans, and your dating timeline is off. I mean, way off.
As far as the dating timeline being off, let's remember that we don't just have hundreds of individuals represented from different locations just for Australopithecus afarensis and Baragazeli and Sediba and the Paranthropines and everything else, and those are just within the hominines. We also have every fossil for every other thing, all of which, every one of them, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of fossils can be traced to their according paleontological periods. Tens of thousands of different finds, all of them radiometrically dated by different types of isotopes and different methods, all of which overlapping, we're coordinating this particular timeline of millions of years, all of them. Then compared to the genetic molecular clock, which also corroborates the same thing, which we've already established earlier in this conversation, that just the evolution of proboscideans doesn't match the young Earth creationist timeline, because nothing matches the young Earth creationist timeline. Not even their own mythology matches it. Not even recorded human history matches it. So, that's just taking her issue about the timeline out. Let's talk about the sexual dimorphism of Australopiths in how one of them can be 3.5 foot tall and the other one have a size 9 shoe.
Well, we have humans today that span a difference that wide. We have human females who are like within the 4 foot range and human males who are 7 foot plus. I mean, you have humans that are easily within that range, and we're not very sexually dimorphic. So what does the range look like in a species that is something like Australopithecus, something that is conventionally speaking, and like this tends to be the consensus right now, on the like sexually dimorphic on the order of somewhere between males being 30% taller, like larger than females, which for record, with regard to stature, because this is what we're considering here, humans are like a max for our average, like 11 to 15, something like that, percent dimorphic with regard to stature. Australopiths, we're looking at something on the gorilla, like chimp to gorilla range, and gorillas are twice the size, males versus females.
Twice the size.
Twice.
So a 3.5 foot tall female would have a male 7 feet tall.
Yeah, if we're looking at the gorilla level dimorphism that is estimated by many for Australopiths. Now, to be fair,
the 7 foot males are size 9 or bigger.
Probably bigger than that. And you know, this is the thing too, right? Like we have male Australopiths. Again, I mentioned him earlier, Katanumu, with the big man specimen that's like almost twice the size of Lucy. He's a large male. Lucy is a small female, right? Like Lucy is small for females. Like she's small compared to other female Australopiths. The actual size of Australopith females would have been like quite a bit larger than Lucy. So even if we're talking about a species that isn't as dimorphic as gorillas, the range still makes sense, right? It still works. But I mean,
these people These people are arguing that Lucy, that individual, not just that
Female.
species, but that individual
These
could
small
not have
female-
made those footprints because they were 1,000 miles away. Do they think that we think Lucy was the only one?
They genuinely think that we propose that Lucy the individual was involved in the Laetoli footprints. Like I've heard that before from some of these guys. I don't know if it was Genesis Apologetics. Actually, it might have been. It might have been their classroom series. But I digress. Like, let's talk for a minute about the Laetoli footprints, because this one is a favorite of mine. The Laetoli footprints are fascinating. When they were initially discovered, it was by the Leakeys. Mary Leakey was present, and she was like, oh my God, these look really human. These are really interesting. They were discovered before we actually had like any concrete foot morphology for many of the Australopiths. And they were found at a location where we were finding Australopith and early Homo remains. And so they were like, well, this is really strange. Like, these do look quite human. Maybe bipedalism did evolve first. I mean, this was decades and decades and decades ago. So since then, we've found a lot more fossils.
Before Lucy was discovered, before Africanus was even recognized.
Well, Africanus was recognized in the form of the Tong child, but that's all we had, right? It was a kid. It was this. This is it, right? Just a kid with a skull. But the most important thing with the Laetoli footprints is what they actually look like. Because I teach the Laetoli footprints every year, and we teach them, the trackway, what it looks like, who was present, and the trackway itself is made up of two different sized individuals, a large male and a small female. So the tracks themselves are too dimorphic to be human, right? They're, again, like, these are small populations of individuals who are living at the time, not the modern human diversity. The odds of finding, given our average dimorphism between any two humans, two individuals that were as dimorphic as the individuals at the Laetoli footprints that made them, not very high. But more importantly than that is the fact that we've taken casts of the Laetoli footprints and we've investigated the biomechanics of the makers. And here's what they did. Here's what the experimenters said, because I think this is so cool. They got modern unshod hunter-gatherers, so hunter-gatherer people today who walk barefoot all the time, and they had them walk in a makeshift ashway. They took a cast. They took chimpanzees. They had them stand upright and walk in a makeshift ashway. They took casts of that. Then they took casts of the Laetoli footprints and they measured the difference. The prints are intermediate with regard to weight bearing. It's an intermediate trackway. The toe is semi-divergent. It's not super divergent, but it's more divergent than modern unshod humans, which is exactly
so
what
when this guy, and we have to remember that this museum that they're recording in literally is a church.
Yeah.
And the guy who's playing the museum docent actually is a pastor for Young Earth Creationism Church, and that's where they're recording this whole thing. So when he says that they looked human, I mean completely human. That too is a lie, because, as you said, they're intermediate. You see the normal footprint pattern, but the big toe is more divergent than it is in any modern human. Less so by far than chimpanzees, who by comparisons walk on a separate set of hands. So it's not as divergent as their feet, but definitely more divergent than in our feet.
Yeah, and it's significantly more similar to humans than it is to chimps, which is what you would expect from something that's been a biped for quite some time but hasn't perfected it. Like, this is, again, you can find Mary Leakey's exact quotes for this stuff. She doesn't say completely human, right? Like, she doesn't say that. She's like, these look really human, which is what you would say if you found the first trackway ever of an Australopith who you previously didn't know was bipedal already, right? Like, you thought it, but this was the first actual trackway. And I mean, you could talk a lot about how cool the Laetoli footprints are, right? There's a smaller individual walking in the footsteps of the largest. So there's 3 individuals who've made this trackway. This suggests that you've got a small group. You've got a female, a male, and perhaps a dependent offspring. The female is also burdened on one side, so she's stepping goose-stepped with one foot, which we get similar trackways today on women when they're carrying something on their hip, which suggests that she's carrying a kid on her hip. Why would she carry a kid on her hip unless she was bipedal, right? Like, and it's cool, right? Because it suggests that Australopiths were pretty committed to that, because the kid couldn't hold on to her back anymore. There wasn't enough fur, and the gravity was fighting against it too much. So she had to actually start carrying a young Australopith like a human might. which is just cool in and of itself, aside from the fact that there is no way to make the argument that these are human footprints. When they say human, they're talking like anatomically, close to anatomically modern. They're not even talking about human as in members of genus Homo, like habilis, which you could maybe make the argument, but still, no. And then what she says about how, oh, well, they found human remains nearby. No, they found genus Homo remains in the same areas as we found Australopiths much earlier, because yes, early genus Homo is thought to have descended from Australopithecus. So yeah, they would be in the same area in different strata. I mean, this isn't hard stuff, right?
And this is why I argued earlier that I would be okay with the Australopith declination being Homo, because I don't like paraphyly.
And it's super paraphyletic. Like, it is uber paraphyletic. Yeah, and honestly, the thing is if Naledi ends up being perhaps a descendant of Africanus or Sediba, or Africanus Sediba, then Naledi, then that makes Homo paraphyletic too.
Wouldn't Homo in that case be polyphyletic?
Yeah, sorry, you're right. Yeah, it would be polyphyletic. My mistake. Yeah, it would be polyphyletic.
Okay.
Which is crazy to think about.
Also, didn't they find 13 fossils belonging to the genus Homo in that region that looked human?
Yes, but the team that found Lucy later reclassified those bones as Lucy's species.
Sounds convenient. If the footprints look unmistakably human, human-looking bones were found around the footprints, and Lucy's fossils were found about 1,000 miles away, wouldn't it make more sense that the footprints were actually made by humans and that your timeline is off?
Sure, I guess one would certainly make that argument, but we know for sure that humans were not around back then.
I thought you might say that. Did you know that just a couple of years ago, they found anatomically modern human footprints in Western Crete that supposedly dated to 5.7 million years old? The article stated that the footprints were 1 million years older than Ardipithecus romidus. That conflicts with the hypothesis that Ardi is a direct ancestor of later hominins. So, using the evolutionary timeline, these human footprints predate both Ardi and Lucy. It sure seems like the ape-to-man story doesn't line up with these footprints dating to a time before upright walking was even supposed to happen.
I hate the Trichios prints because no one who studies hominins even thinks they're footprints. And if she wants to suggest they're anatomically modern, she needs to look at the size of them, because some of them are like that big, right? They are teeny tiny. They're blobs in the ground that, as far as I'm concerned, there's zero support that these things are actually footprints. What's his name? Jeff Meldrum. He's a hominin locomotion guy. He studies hominin locomotion. They lack all of the characteristics that are typically seen in trackways. The overflow when a heel strike occurs, pads, like the actual pads that you see from like a toe or like a finger or something like that pushing off, right? They don't have any of these things. But let's say for a minute that they were footprints. You know what was living 5.6 million years ago, 5.7 million years ago, all across Europe still? Apes.
Including Sahelanthropus, which it is commonly used as illustrative of the common ancestor between humans and chimpanzees.
Well, Sahelanthropus was in Chad, but remember who I talked about earlier was Danuvius. Danuvius is argued to have been an upright in the trees, extended limb clamberer, like a gibbon would be, moving on top of the trees. So what happens when you take the trees away? It's bipedal on the ground, like gibbons are today. Australopithecus, which lived in Sicily, I think it's Sicily, Italy, same thing. It's right there. It's argued to be something that is bipedal when it comes to the ground by some. I don't know if I personally buy it because I don't think the footprints are footprints. But if they were, you also have something there that's capable of making them. And the size...
Just for clarification for the audience. So yes. Australopithecus was not even an Australopith. Australopithecus is commonly classified as a dryopith, one of 40 different species of pre-great apes. So the Australopiths were ones where when they walk on their hands, you know, as quadrupeds, they walk on their whole hands, not fist walking. And that's the ones that are quadrupedal, because there are a handful, Australopithecus included, who are identified. And some of them live in Europe, not just Africa, but these were before there were gorillas and chimpanzees. This was an earlier class of apes, so something transitional between proconsul and the early and Sahelanthropus, for example.
Well,
and some of them were fully bipedal.
Well, so okay, fully bipedal in the trees is what I would say. Like gibbons are fully bipedal when they are using their legs in the trees. They're walking on top of the branches, right? They're not walking with their hands and their feet on the branches. They're walking with their feet on the branches and their hands upright. So they're fully bipedal.
But then, as you've seen, and anybody can see in a zoo, when a gibbon comes down from the tree,
they're bipedal. Yeah, they're totally bipedal. And Arthur Keith had this as a stage in his stages of hominin evolution, that there would be, an above branch arboreal quadruped phase, an above branch orthograde phase, a terrestrial orthograde phase, and then you move into advanced stages of bipedalism. And the argument goes, and again, like I don't believe that the Tracheos prints are prints. I don't think that they're trackways. If you look at a picture of them, if you look at the varying sizes of the footprints, if you look at how the weight is born, it doesn't make any sense to me. And again, I'm not a trackway expert, but let's say that they are. They're in Crete, right? They're right there, right in the area where Australopithecus and other hominids, early hominids, were. That were capable of walking bipedally, right? And some have argued that they were doing so habitually when they came to the ground because they were already doing so in the trees. So the argument goes. Danuvius, for sure. Australopithecus is argued to be that way too. You've got Auranopithecus that is right around the corner. You've got Gracopithecus that's also right there in Greece. You've got hominids out the wazoo, all in the area that were capable of making those prints. A chimpanzee could make those prints because it stands bipedally occasionally to feed, and it also walks bipedally sometimes. To say that they are completely human prints could not be anything other than an outright mistruth as far as I'm concerned. There's no way you could read anything about these, look at the pictures of them, and conclude that they're anatomically modern. Not one person has ever said, ever, to my understanding, that these look anything like modern human footprints. The argument is that they might be a trackway. And as far as I know, the consensus is that it isn't a trackway, because I've not heard anything other than Meldrum's coverage of it since. And the guy who discovered it was a dinosaur trackway guy, not a hominin trackway guy. So maybe they are prints. If they are, there's things that are capable of making them that aren't anatomically modern, which makes sense because they don't look anatomically modern. That's just not what they are. Full stop, wholesale.
It sounds more plausible to me that these ape-like creatures died in ice age flooding that happened after Noah's flood, just thousands of years ago.
A flood that there was no evidence for.
Well, I actually believe there's a lot of evidence for Noah's flood.
It doesn't matter what you happen to believe, sweetheart. We have absolute proof the flood never happened. It's not just that it's not possible to have happened. It's that even if it was a miracle, even if it still could have happened, we still have proof that it didn't happen. All kinds of different proof from many different fields of science. The flood didn't happen. There's no evidence that it did. If there was, then you wouldn't be saying, well, I happen to believe there's lots of evidence. No, because there'd be nothing to show. Nothing that stands up. Nothing, nowhere, from nobody. There isn't. It's done.
Yeah, the flood is actually just such a massive thorn in the side for young Earth creationists because it is like singularly the most easy to disprove thing about what they say because it would leave such an obvious trace if it did happen. And there's nothing of the sort. Absolutely nothing. I mean, we could spend all day going through all of the different things that they say support it or all of the things that don't. And everybody would leave very happy because it's as you said, it is finished. Like I'm not being hyperbolic here, like it could not have happened to the degree that the people who say that it did are saying it's miraculous. And even they are kind of having to cop to the fact that, like, if it did happen, it certainly didn't leave any trace of itself. where do you even begin with this, right? Like my favorite thing against the flood, again, is the heat problem. If you took all of the heat released in the past 4.5 billion years, or even the past 500 million years, you're talking about minimum for 500 million years, the equivalent of heat released during the year of Noah's flood being 93,000 hydrogen bombs per square kilometer of Earth's surface. It just doesn't work. It doesn't, there's nothing about it that is plausible whatsoever. You can't make the evaporites. You can't explain the positioning of the continents. You can't explain the impact events or the extinction signatures or thermoluminescence dating matching up with tree rings and the dendrochronology and var formation and carbon-14 dating over the past non-flood years. None of it works, period. Like it just isn't going to fly. But I mean, I do like that they included that in there. That was bold of them to be like, and also not only is Lucy bad and stupid, but also the flood happened. That's this bold choice.
But the evidence that you claim to have for Lucy is based on hundreds of bone pieces glued together to make a fragmented skeleton of about 20% of her bones. Oh, by the way, may I pull up something else? Just a few years ago, CNN did a report on a study done by a team of scientists where Lucy fell 40 feet from a tree, traveling 35 miles an hour, where she died. So, what was a little ape who was supposedly walking upright doing 40 feet up in a tree?
So, a genus of beings that have lived in trees traditionally forever and still today can use trees to evade most predators, or at least give you a warning on the attack of a predator, at least a large predator. They're saying that somebody that is capable of walking across savannas and then only occasionally finding groves of trees might still live in the trees, like Swiss Family Robinson, the people who built tree houses when they were stuck. The English family in the traditional story, they find themselves in the African wilderness and they have to make do. So what do? They live in the trees because it's the safest place to avoid frickin' lions, right? So why would Lucy be in the tree? Oh, if evolution is true, then why would she do exactly what I would do if I was stuck in the African savannah?
Well, people climb trees all the time today. People forage in the trees. People like climb up into the trees and live. Kids spend all their time climbing when they're little. Like to the extent that every place, including most churches, have a jungle gym for them to practice their climbing. I mean, doesn't it kind of seem like there's still a little bit of an inclination towards climbing things as kids today?
And maybe perhaps losing a bit of your aptitude in climbing, such that if you're no longer really any good at it, you might fall out of the tree.
Well, and the thing is that it's like she had curved phalanges. Like, I don't know anybody who argues that Lucy didn't still climb in the trees. Like, of course she climbed in the trees. Australopiths couldn't use fire. How else are they going to evade predators in the savannah? You want to know what let's consider baboons for a second. So baboons are terrestrial quadrupeds. That's what they're classified as today. You know where they sleep? They sleep in the trees. They sleep in the trees and they sleep in cliff sides. They don't sleep on the ground because it's dangerous on the ground when you are a primate living on the savannah. Like savannah dwelling chimps, you know where they sleep? In the trees. So why would Australopithecus be any different? There is no example, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, of a primate that lives on the savannah that doesn't have access to fire that sleeps on the ground because of predators. And again, like, it's not controversial that Lucy spent time in the trees. No one argues against that. So, like, okay, sure. Yeah, she died falling out of a tree. Cool. Did every Australopith die falling out of a tree? That's my next question. No, because not all of them not all of them fell out of trees, is I guess the point.
Yet, when millions of students every year see Lucy in museums, she's shown with complete human-like feet and hands, eye whites like a human, walking upright with human-like gazes and poses. Sometimes they even remove the hair from her skin, again, trying to make her appear more human-like.
Hey, come on. You're not a credible source.
I bet all these trained paleo experts don't even have these concerns about Lucy.
As I've already brought up, though, there's a whole lineup of famous paleo experts who would stand up here and say these same types of things. Just read Dr. Oxnard's Order of Man. He said that Australopithecines are now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism. All of this should make us wonder about the usual presentation of human evolution in introductory textbooks. Dr. Herbert says that his fellow paleoanthropologists compare the pygmy chimps to Lucy, one of the oldest hominid fossils known, and find the similarities striking. They're almost identical in body size, in stature, and in brain size.
Before you got a rail. But where they say you're not a qualified source, and she says, well, many anthropologists or whatever would be up here saying the same sorts of things.
Yeah, I remember that.
Not a fucking one I can think of. How about you?
No. In fact, the source she used, I'm fairly certain, based off of what she said with Australopithecus, which is how she said it. I don't know if you heard, which is, they also used paleo expert, which I told you last time. That phrase comes directly from this book. So they're pulling directly from it. But yeah, I mean, like, I'm fairly certain that, I can't remember exactly Oxnard, but I'm fairly certain that that's like a super duper duper old source, which would make sense. Like, I'm sure we could look it up after this and just, you could put like a little note here if we were right. But, and the second person saying that we compare hominins to bonobos today. Yeah, we do. And in fact, Tim White had an entire article talking about Ardipithecus as to why that's inappropriate. And I'm fairly certain that that's where that quote comes from. I'm not positive, but like, I'm fairly certain that that quote is from someone saying, we compare Australopiths to bonobos, and we shouldn't be doing that. Because like, I know for a fact that that article does exist, and that sounds very familiar. I'm not certain, but it sounds to me like that's the case. But yeah, like, even if that's not a quote from Tim White's paper, what I will say is like, yeah, there are absolutely similarities between Australopiths and bonobos. There are similarities between humans and bonobos too. A lot of them.